Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our lecture, Exploring the Relationship Between Science and Judaism, with our esteemed professor, Rabbi Dr. Bradley Artson. Conversations about science and religion continue to play a major role in our contemporary society, often with adversarial mindsets. I look forward to learning this evening how science and Judaism can complement each other to potentially help transform the world for the better. Thank you to our generous sponsors of this program, Edith and Robert Zinn, Mary Hammer in memory of Arnold Hammer, and Rabbi Janet Ozerbass in memory of her parents, Norma and Herbert Ozer, who combined the best of religion and science to create a family filled with love. Thank you also to Andrew R. Ammerman for sponsoring our Spring 2024 lecture series. He dedicates this semester's learning in loving memory of Josephine and H. Max Ammerman, Stephen C. Ammerman, and Avi West. As usual, please ask questions using the Q&A button on your Zoom screen, and try to keep them as concise as possible and use complete sentences. Questions will be discussed at the end of the lecture. And I now welcome Bill Halpern, the Haberman Institute Board Treasurer, who will introduce our speaker. Welcome, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Welcome, friends, to tonight's program, Science and Religion, Reviving an Ancient Partnership. As Matt said, my name is Bill Halpern. I'm the treasurer of the board of directors for the Haberman Institute, and I'm honored to introduce this talk with Rabbi Dr. Bradley Shavit Artson. I'd like to extend a special welcome to all of you who are new to the Haberman Institute. Our mission is to provide high-quality, in-depth encounters with Jewish thought, history, and culture. I'm sure you will find that tonight's talk will check each of those boxes. We invite you to learn more about our programs and classes by visiting our website, habermaninstitute.org. Our Spring 2024 program lineup includes a wide range of relevant and engaging topics, including a three-part series on Jewish culture, art, literature, and music, and so much more. Again, you can learn more about what's coming up over the next few months by going to the Haberman Institute website. And now about this evening's program. Our esteemed speaker, Rabbi Dr. Bradley Shavit Artson, holds the Abner and Rosalind Goldstein Dean's Chair of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies and is Vice President of American Jewish University in Los Angeles. Rabbi Artson has long been a passionate advocate for social justice, human dignity, and inclusion. He wrote a book on Jewish teachings on war, peace, and nuclear annihilation in the 1980s, became a leading voice advocating for LGBT marriage and coordination and ordination in the 1990s, and has published and spoken widely on environmental ethics, special needs, inclusion, racial and economic justice, cultural and religious dialogue, and cooperation and working for a just and secure peace for Israel and the Middle East. A member of the philosophy department, he is particularly interested in theology, ethics, and the integration of science and religion, which is the focus of tonight's talk. He mentors Camp Ramah in California in, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, Ojai, and Ramah of Northern California in the Bay Area. He is also dean of the Zacharias Frankel College in Potsdam, Germany, ordaining conservative European rabbis. Rabbi Artson is a frequent contributor for the Huffington Post, the Times of Israel, and the Jewish Journal of Greater Los Angeles. He is the author of 12 books and over 250 articles, most recently, Renewing the Process of Creation, a Jewish Integration of Science and Spirit. He's married to Alana Artson, and they're the proud parents of twins Jacob and Shira. And with that, Rabbi Artson, thank you for sharing your insight with us this evening. The Zoom screen is yours.
Thank you, Bill. And that was a yeoman's job with a lot of big words in that. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure to be here, and I thank you all for being here. I thank the Haberman Institute for allowing me the chance to have this conversation with you and to talk about a subject that is close to my heart and I assume close to yours as well. When we think about science and religion, we all bring a lot to it. But I'd like to suggest that at the very base of both of these human institutions is an intense curiosity, a sense of wonder and not taking for granted the world around us. Both religion and science express a sense of surprise at what we are surrounded by, including watching our own development and growth and being surprised by what it is to be human. And in all of those things, science and religion bring a variety of perspectives and procedures to give us a way of growing our curiosity and our wonder. Some of us come by this really honestly, meaning it's deep, deep in who we are. So I want to reveal two stories about myself to share what brings me to science and religion. And then we're going to talk a bit about what is science and what is religion, and then the ways that they can learn to get along with each other. So the first thing I want to tell you, never before revealed, I grew up an atheist. I was a very secular person. Grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a great place to be an atheist. And I was always interested in reading, always curious about history and literature and science and the world. But this is actually a religion story that I have not yet revealed in public. So I want to share with you that when I was about 10 years old, I was reading a book of Greek mythology. And I decided that it sounded pretty cool. So I was going to offer a sacrifice to Zeus, me, a Jewish atheist from San Francisco. So I got one of those old coffee cans. You know, they used to make Folgers coffee in these big tin cans, empty can, and I filled it with dirt. And I got a Hebrew National hot dog, why not the best? And I put that on the dirt and I lit it with matches until it burned. And I did that as an offering to Zeus. I'm telling you that because my religious proclivities precluded having a way to hold it. I grew up in a non-religious household and we were very proudly Jewish, but we weren't observant. So I didn't have any Jewish ways to manifest this kind of spirituality. But I look back on that 10-year-old kid, and I think that's a striving for spiritual engagement. It's wanting to have someone to say thank you to. It's wanting to have a way to express marvel and awe and wonder. And that's really what religion is all about, is coming up with a way to say, this life I'm living is extraordinary, and this place is full of wonder, and I want to have a way to say thank you in all of that. Second unlikely story. In 8th grade, I decided to do a science project. And so I persuaded my parents that what I wanted to do was to observe at close hand a Pacific octopus. And my father found a scientist, an oceanographer, biologist at Scripps Institute in Monterey, and they had octopi, and he was willing to share 2 little ones with me. So we drove down to Monterey from San Francisco and had these big jars, brought back 2 octopi, one of whom made it, one of whom didn't. And I had a large saltwater tank in my basement garage. And I put the octopus in there. I gave him the name of Ichabod Clancy. That's a good octopus name. And once a week, I would go to the beach at Ocean Beach, and I would collect these crabs, about yay round, which I kept alive in a mayonnaise jar in my mother's refrigerator. I look back on that. Thanks, Mom. She was a saint, obviously. Every time she opened the fridge for anything, there were these crabs poking at the glass. And Ichabod made it for about a half a year, which is not bad for an octopus in captivity, but he was magnificent. The octopus shows its feelings by its skin color and tone. So if it was just me and he recognized me, he would turn this kind of happy brown bumpy and swim back and forth watching me. If I was with somebody, he would get scared. He would turn smooth white with these black circles around his eyes, and he would hide under a rock. If he was mad at something, he would get cragged and red, and if he was really excited, he would just shimmer all kinds of colors. And I learned a lot from Ichabod, but one of the things I learned was that science is really about wonder and joy. That my time spent watching this octopus and hanging out with this octopus and feeding him and watching him go about his business was just connecting me to the world around me. And there was something powerful and transformative about that. And those two stories, the sacrifice to Zeus and the raising an octopus, aren't they both about wonder and surprise and openness and wanting to strengthen those connections? There is at the core of spirituality and science those common traits. And I think we ignore that because we live in a culture that wants to emphasize the battleground, the war between science and religion. If science is right, then religion is nonsense. And if religion is right, then we can dispense with science. And those are two dangerous attitudes that I think distort both of these beautiful human enterprises. So let's start with some definitions and some understandings. What is science? Science, I want to define as a way of doing research. Okay, so it's a method for finding out about a certain category of things. And that category is those things that are public and replicable and testable. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Public means it's something that you experience and I experience, and therefore we can talk about it. It's a shared something rather than something that's completely internal. If there's something that I experience it, but no one else has ever experienced anything like it, then science doesn't have a way to weigh in on it. It's only when it's something that happens publicly that we all have opinions about, that we all can argue about what it looks like, how much it weighs, how big it is, how often it happens, those things. It's when we do that that it becomes the kind of thing that a scientist can test. Second, it has to be replicable. If it only happens once, then you can't compare and contrast it to anything else. And so it means that anything you surmise about it might be right, but could very well be wrong. The philosopher David Hume tells a wonderful, chilling story about the scientific method in the form of a young turkey. Every morning, the farmer goes outside, and the turkey is in a hutch, and the farmer bangs on the door of the hutch, and the turkey sticks its neck out, and the farmer drops corn to feed the turkey. Day one, bang, 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 sticks out its neck, corn falls. Day two, bang, 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 sticks out its neck, corn falls. By day three, the turkey, this young scientist, has realized that every time it sticks its neck out, corn falls. And so the turkey assumes a causal relationship. It is my sticking my neck out, that makes the corn fall. Well, this happens day after day after day. So the turkey tests the hypothesis, and it's true. It's every day the bang happens, it sticks its neck out, the corn falls. Obviously, the neck sticking out is causing the corn falling down. Until one day in December, around Thanksgiving, when bang, 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 it sticks its neck out to a very different outcome. Now, that story is Hume's way of saying you don't always know cause and effect. You know when something happens after something else, but the assumption of cause needs repetition to be able to test, because you need to come up with other possible causes that you then discount. Otherwise, all you're measuring is A always happens right before B, but you have no idea whether A causes B or not. So for something to be the kind of thing science can weigh in on, it not only has to be public, it has to be replicable, has to be something that can happen more than once. And then related to that, and finally, science is about that which is testable, meaning you have to be able to come up with a way of refining and containing the question so that you can know that it is in fact A that causes B and not some other thing you weren't thinking about at all. Because otherwise, with very good possibility, you'll make the wrong assumption. You'll assume that something has an impact when it actually doesn't. All right, so public, replicable, and testable. Now, that for some people is all there is. There are scientists out there who tell us that the only kinds of things that are real are things that are public and replicable and testable. And if they're not those three things, then they're not actually things at all. They're just opinions. So I think Van Gogh is great. Great. That's my opinion. It's not replicable. It's not testable. I can't tell you the criteria by which I think Van Gogh is the best painter ever. It's just my opinion. And scientists can respect opinions, but opinions don't carry authority. They just tell you how someone's feeling about something or how they evaluate that something, but they're not telling you about the thing itself. If you want to assume that the only way to know about facts is it has to be science, which means that it has to be public, replicable, testable, then you have one of two choices. You can either say the only things that are real fit those categories, or there's a category of reality that isn't public or necessarily replicable or necessarily testable, but still real. And so there has to be a way of talking about those things, of exploring those things, of getting a sense of those things. But whatever those ways are, they're not going to be science, because science is limited to the kinds of things you can test and measure and repeat. Now, just a philosopher's word. If this doesn't make sense, what I'm about to say, then ignore it. We'll go back to our regularly scheduled program. The claim that for something to be real, it has to be public and replicable and testable is itself not public, replicable, and testable. So it kind of undermines itself. It cannibalizes itself because by its own criteria, that's not true, right? The only way it's true is if it's not true, meaning there are things that are real that are not public and replicable and testable. But what that means, that's just a fancy philosopher's game for saying when a person in a white coat tells you that the only things that are real are facts that can be proven, they're offering you an opinion, not scientific evidence-based claims. And they may be right. Scientists have as much right to intuition as the rest of us do, but they're not practicing science when they do that. So I want to be one of those people who says that in the realm of what's factual, public, replicable, testable, in that realm, science is by far the best technique people have ever developed. Science is what's allowing you and I to talk on this magical technology. This used to be the kind of thing that only sorcerers and wizards could accomplish. And you can fly across the country on a metal tube, and you can complain about how slow the internet is on that metal tube that's plugged into nothing, right? All because of science. And there are plenty of us who have survived diseases because of science. So I'm a big fan of science. I'm a big believer in the ability of this method to advance our knowledge about the facts of the world around us. But I also know that many of the important things in my life are not factual. They're the love I feel for my spouse or for my children, or what loyalty means, or the value of truth, or patriotism, or aesthetic values. There's a whole lot of things that contribute richly to human and mammalian life that are not fact-driven, that are not, in fact, in the realm of science. So if that's true, then there have to be things that help us to learn about that larger reality. And I think there are indeed many such things. Mathematics is a symbol system language that lets us explore a whole swath of reality. And music allows us to explore depths of emotion and aesthetics that might not be susceptible to analysis or factual data. Myth is a storytelling system that allows us to be able to enter into an emotional connection to the world. Metaphor is a language system that allows us to compare unlike things to each other and thereby to pick up on commonalities we might not otherwise intuit. And finally, meditation. These 5 M's are all of them powerful tools that open us up to important aspects of reality that are not susceptible to being measured or weighed or compared and contrasted in the way that factual things are. And here's where I think religion steps in. Religion is a communal way of responding to those parts of reality that evoke joy or terror or wonder or mystery. And we concretize those experiences through a rich combination of myths, symbolic stories, of rituals, behaviors designed to concretize a myth sometimes, to cement an identity, to sanctify a place, to ceremony. Think of a graduation ceremony. We all know pomp and circumstance. We know what it means when someone takes a rolled up piece of paper from someone else and then moves a thing across their hat from one end of their hat to the other, right? These rituals, these ceremonies mean something to us. You can unite a crowd in song, right? And the human mind has remarkable ways of processing song and music that may be one of the distinctive traits of our species, but it connects us with everyone else who's singing that same song, right? Beliefs have a way of doing that, shared identity, and a sense of community. These are all powerful things that religion mobilizes, and in the process allows us to express a deeper joy, deeper wonder, deeper marvel. There's a wonderful scholar of science and religion, Ian Barber, who passed away a few years ago, and he described four possible relationships between science on the one hand and religion on the other. The first, and the one that is most popular in terms of what people assume is the only one, is conflict. If science is true, religion is nonsense. If religion is true, science is a distraction. Right? And that is true for one kind of science and one kind of religion. If the nature of your science is based on a metaphysics that science teaches you everything you can know about anything, and there's nothing left to know if science can't weigh in on it, then that science is going to be an enemy for any other way of knowing. And if your religion is such that you say, I saw a bumper sticker the other day on the freeway that said, God said it, that settles it. If that's your religion, then it's also going to be true that anything that says anything outside of your religion, you have to treat as nonsense or a distortion or a distraction, fossils, for example. But that's not the only kind of religion, and that's not the only kind of science that's out there. There are plenty of scientists and plenty of people in religion who have different ways of understanding their own enterprise and the other. So Barber posits a second category, which he calls independence. Those people tend to think that science is descriptive and religion is about values. So science is about how things work, and religion is why. For some people, that works. For me, it doesn't, because they leak into each other too often. Religion makes all kinds of factual claims. Did the sea split or did it not? Did he rise from the dead after 3 days or not? Those are fact questions for a lot of people, and in that sense, they cross a line. In addition to which, religion offers a lot of fact claims too. You should not commit adultery. You should not commit murder. Those aren't simply meaning statements. Those are normative statements. And science also crosses the line. Science is infused richly with values. During the height of the Cold War, biologists did research on how evolution was driven forward by competition, which it is. But during the break in the Cold War, some of us remember that because it looks like it's rapidly waning. But in the break in the Cold War, they discovered cooperation as an evolutionary force too. The ability of individuals or species to work together towards enhancing their survival has evolutionary implications as well. And the scientists who did that didn't on purpose say, I'm going to come up with a new way. It's that in an age that emphasizes competition, then the scientists are going to emphasize competition, and that's what they're going to do their research on. But when you start talking about the value of cooperation out in the world, then scientists are going to say, hey, I wonder what role that has in the work that I'm doing. The decision of what's worthy to do research on isn't a fact-driven question, it's a value-driven question. So for me, that independence doesn't work, which leads to the third category, and that's dialogue. That religion and science do best. They thrive maximally when they talk to each other, when they're in conversation, when they correct each other, when they work together. Now, both the dialogue model assumes they're two separate phenomenon. Religion is religion, science is science, but they should be in conversation. They should be saying, what do you do about that? How do you correct for that? Here's what I think. What do you think? And I like that more than the first two, but I'm more of a number 4 category guy, which is integration. Integration is there is one universe out there, and there are multiple ways to understand it. Religion is one way of relating to and connecting to that one universe we live in. Science is another valuable way to connect to the universe. But the two of them ultimately can't be in contradiction without one of them having a problem, maybe both. So the world I want to live in is one in which religion and science are both manifestations of deeper underlying aesthetics and values. I mentioned some of them: joy, wonder, marvel, curiosity. And that means that they're not only talking to each other, they're feeding off each other. They're nurturing each other, because when your scientific understanding improves, that's a cause to say, wow, how wonderful. I want to say thank you. I want to sing a hallelujah about that. And when my religion brings me to appreciate how marvelous and fragile and precious life is on this planet, that's going to drive me into the arms of ecology or oceanography, because I'm going to want to understand it better. So the two of them can nurture each other and keep each other going. And those last two, dialogue and integration, they give us ways of expanding our sense of marvel. So I want to give you a couple for instances before we close. I want to talk about the way our understanding of the universe has expanded. Turn of the century 1900s, people thought there was one cosmos, one solar system, and that we were it. So the sun was at the center, and there were maybe a couple, I don't know, dozen, hundred, whatever, planets, stars, But in the last century, we've watched that explode. We've watched as there are not only millions of galaxies, but hundreds of millions of galaxies. We've been able to do deep space photographs where no matter how much you expand the photograph, there are just hundreds of galaxies opening up. So that in this magnificent space-time bubble we find ourselves, this 14 billion year old expansion of matter and light and energy, the universe is vastly more complex and vastly more marvelous than anything we've ever experienced or known. Now, on the one hand, that dethrones our centrality. The Earth is not at the center of the universe. Humanity is not the pinnacle in terms of size. There may even be life elsewhere in the universe. We haven't encountered them yet. We don't know, but could be. It's a very extravagant universe we live in. But doesn't that mean that the marvel of living in one of those rare spots in this universe, where everything is primed just right, is extraordinary? We live on a planet sufficiently stable that complex life was able to co-evolve over tens of millions of years and had sufficient change and stability that we had access to nutrients, access to sufficient warmth, shelter from cosmic radiation waves, all provided by a series of circumstances so improbable that it just makes you say, wow, we have a moon that circles our planet, that stabilizes our tides and stabilizes our planetary tilt. That's very unusual in the universe, but without it, there'd be no life. We live in a universe of carbon-based life, which is fortuitous because carbon is so available, right? And it was sufficiently stable that despite periodic events that nearly wiped out all of life, it was able to continue in a straight line, diversifying and complexifying, such that on this amazing planet, the brain evolved 5 separate times. It's as if life wanted to manifest in brain. And that's not brain that evolved from earlier brains, that happened too, but there were 5 separate paths on which brains emerged at the top: an octopus brain and a human brain and a bee brain and a bird brain. These are amazing things in which it looks almost directional. And that means that we are related to all living things. Is that a science statement or is that a religion statement? Seems to me it's both. When I was a teenager, I was interested in being a biologist. So I read a lot of books of animal behavior. And at the time in the 70s, the word among people who studied animal behavior was that perceiving emotion in your animals was imposing human understandings on other species. That was bad. That was anthropomorphizing them. And I remember as a teenager thinking, these people have never lived with a dog or a cat or a horse, because if they had, they would know better. My dog, when I was growing up, she would have long, shaggy hair and she'd get it knotted up. So every now and then we'd have to take her to the vet and the vet would just shave it off. And she would come home from the vet and go straight under my mother's king-size bed and wouldn't come out for 3 days. And we all knew that she was mortified. She didn't want to be seen in the way she was. Now, those biologists back then told me I was misapplying, I was imposing my human feelings on my dog. But if you look in animal behavior textbooks now, they say the opposite. They say, where do you think you got those feelings from, human mammal? You got them from the evolutionary chain. They come to you from animals. You may conceive of them differently, but you're harvesting mammal feelings that came up the evolutionary tree to you from them. Maimonides, by the way, the great medieval philosopher, says the same thing. He says that a human mother and a mother cow feel the same emotions about their young, they just think about it differently. That's amazing, isn't it? So science has evolved to take in new understandings. And that last area I want to talk about then is consciousness, right? There's a way in which some scientists entertain a metaphysics that the universe is made out of inert matter, and then somehow mysteriously consciousness just appears at the tip. But the more we study life, the more we see mind all the way down. So it used to be, we thought that only people engaged in reasoned thought and symbol thought. But we know that's not true now. I'll tell you 2 experiments. There was a parrot named Alex who said all kinds of things that a parrot wasn't supposed to say, including creative thought. He would say things no one had taught him to say. Bees, who have itty bitty little insect brains, can be taught to recognize a particular kind of triangle. And then when they see other kinds of triangles, different size, shape, color, texture, they still recognize it as a triangle. That's extraordinary. That means that in some ways, bees are engaging in symbolic thought. They're recognizing that that is like that, even though no one's teaching them that. The most extraordinary example of that is slime mold. Slime mold are a multicellular colony of organizations. They don't have brains, they don't have neurons. But when you put them together, they've done amazing studies where you can put a slime mold in a maze, and you can put food at the other end of the maze, and the slime mold within a very quick period of time will tell you the most efficient way to get from one end of the maze to the other. They've used them to upgrade subway systems, where you show them the layout and they can, with food at one end or the other, come up with, here's the way you should set that thing out so that the subway is the most efficient it can possibly be. Now, what's amazing to me about that is these are creatures who don't have neurons. They don't have neurology. They don't have brains. And yet they're doing things that we would call anticipating, planning, thinking, logic. And that's because there is a mindfulness all the way through. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our topic today? It means that science and religion are not only not enemies, they have common cause. The more scientifically literate we become, the more marvelous and magnificent the universe reveals itself to be. There's a great theologian, Sally McTeague, who wrote a book called Super, Natural, ! She doesn't believe in a realm of supernatural. She believes that nature is unbelievably super. And I do too. I think that science gives us tools for understanding just the abundant magnificence of the way nature works things out and finds ways to thrive and to diversify and to complexity against all odds. And religion evolves also. We're not practicing the same Judaism that they practiced in the biblical period. We're not practicing the same Judaism they practiced in the times of late antiquity. The medieval Judaism of Maimonides has a lot in common with contemporary forms of Jewish practice, but it's also very different than contemporary forms. And what is true of science and religion is both learn from experience, both diversify, and both accommodate the needs of a contemporary generation based on the wisdom and experience of previous generations fused with actual contemporary experience. In that regard, don't you think they should be partners? Don't you think they can work together to be able to deepen each other? I hope I've given you a lot to think about. I hope I've helped you to see how truly wonderful this world is. I want to close with one last story, and then I want to hear your comments and questions. We have a townhouse in Los Angeles, and I have a big window in my kitchen. And for the last 2 months, there's been an orb spider who I've named Charlotte, who has built a web that covers the whole window on the outside, which is good. And she's gorgeous. She's about that big around. She's brown. She has a big abdomen with 2 white spots on the underside that look like eyes that makes her more scary looking than she actually is. But I watch her weaving a new web every day. The web gets trashed at night. Nighttime is when she moves around and catches her food. And then she mostly sleeps by day after making a new web. But watching her do that is more than just curiosity for me. It's amazement. How does a self-creating cosmos generate that kind of intelligent being out of pure elements? The stuff that comes out of the guts of exploding stars, the stuff that evolves after the beginning of this space-time bubble, to be self-regulating and able to make such beautiful and amazing works. She really makes an architectural wonder every single morning. And I watch it, sometimes with the dew on it so that it looks like jewelry, sometimes with the sun shining through it, her patience, her diligence. And I think small wonder that we see ourselves in the animal kingdom, because they are our relatives, distantly or close. We do come from them. We share a common heritage with them. And that evokes for me both curiosity and wonder, science and religion, and then the need to say, thanks for this beautiful world. Happy to hear your comments, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rabbi Artson, for such a wonderful presentation filled with stories and thought-provoking insights. For all of you, please continue to send in some questions. We have plenty of time for questions, so send them on in. And there's a couple of questions, I guess I'll begin with, that are more clarifying in nature. One person asked about mathematics as a form of science, and noted that it's public, repetitive, and testable. And then also asked, why are disciplines like psychology, sociology, economics, anthropology called social sciences? I don't know if you can speak to those.
So, look, here's what I think is amazing about mathematics. Mathematics is considered by many scientists the language of nature. But let's acknowledge that people invented math, right? So a primate who climbed out of a tree in Africa and started wandering around the world invented a symbol system that can be used to plot the course of a rocket ship or trace the trajectory of a distant asteroid. Scientists say that in math language. They don't say it in one of the humanities languages. But doesn't that strike you as astonishing? That the product of a primate brain, which evolved to help us survive in the savannas of Africa, can come up with a symbol system that predicts the motions of objects in space that those people who invented math couldn't have possibly known about. That's what I mean by the miraculous side of mathematics, but obviously it's been tweaked and honed and used to make sure that it accurately describes things in the world. But the fact that math works is, I think, an astonishing miracle that math itself can't account for. Science developed over time. Science simply means knowledge. But what we think of as science, the stuff that's testable, evolved over time because stuff that didn't used to be became. So I'll just clue you in on something in the academic world. People who get doctoral degrees in these things are called PhDs, doctors of philosophy, because most of what is now considered something else used to be considered philosophy. Philosophy is really the field where you don't know how to do the research, right? If you have no idea how to pursue a question, then you ask a philosopher. But every now and then, philosophers specialize and they come up with a research method that they can then teach separately. So psychology 100 years ago used to be taught in the philosophy department because it was people thinking about the human mind. I don't know, that sounds reasonable. But once you start to come up with clinical lab experiments and you start to have data, then psychology peels off at the university and it becomes a separate department. Astronomy used to be philosophy. Galileo was a natural philosopher. But once astronomy starts to have data and methodology, it becomes its own field. So many of those fields in both the natural and the human sciences, social sciences, used to be in the philosophy department, and then they become sufficiently mature that they have a body of knowledge, data, and they have a method of accruing data and evaluating it that's their own, and then they become their own field. Social science tends to be about human structures, anthropology, paleontology, things like that. And the natural sciences are about the non-human parts of the world, but that has to do with an ancient human bigotry. We don't like to think of ourselves as part of nature, even though we are.
Thank you. Yes, I studied economics back when I was in college, so it was similarly, was all philosophy for many centuries until they added math to it in the 20th century. So
Correct. And hopefully they'll get it to work someday.
yeah, exactly. Um, there's a question here. How can Judaism contribute to scientific exploration? How can other spiritual practices? And then this person noted that the Tao of physics is powerful, but how does Judaism fit in?
Well, again, you're talking about different kinds of attitudes that people bring to their religion. There are plenty of Taoist fundamentalists who aren't really making science more cherished and more valuable. And there are plenty of superstitious Jews who do the same. But I tried to lay out a path in which we can understand religion as an ally to the scientific method. And that's a matter of you can be wherever you want on the line of Jewish observance and Jewish metaphysics. But if you understand that your religion benefits from scientific research and that you as a religious person, your ability to appreciate the divine is deepened and enhanced by an appreciation of the world that God made. Maimonides, again, famous medieval scientist and rabbi, talked about how God is the author both of Torah and of nature. And so we want to be able to read in both of God's books. I think that attitude guides me. And what Judaism can add then are big things and small. The big things are an attitude of encouraging exploration, of encouraging asking questions, of questioning authority, of asking people to demonstrate things. The Talmud is full of that attitude. The Talmud has 5,000 debates and only 50 of them are resolved, because the Talmud is a book of questions and of arguments and not a book of resolved arguments. That's where science lives too. So I think Judaism is a natural home to recognize the mitzvah value of good questions and of valuing learning as a sacred activity.
Thank you. I'm scanning the different questions here. Another one that just came in. There's a couple, one of the big, I guess, what people, how you've described at the beginning, people think of science and religion in conflict that we have in society today is relates to abortion. So there's a couple of questions here. One is why do you think that the Alabama Supreme Court decision that so clearly relied on religion and one particular religious theology to support what might be better considered a scientific process?
Well, look, that is a complicated question, and one could have an entire talk just on the subject of medical ethics, abortion, and Jewish law. What I will tell you is that the general American anti-abortion movement is based on a particular kind of Protestant theology. And if you assume that the embryo has a soul from the time it's fertilized, that's not a science question. Like you can't measure and test the moment something is ensouled. And Rabbinic Judaism takes a very different approach. It does not assume that the fetus is a human with the same duties or legal obligations or agency as a functioning human being. And that kicks that in at various stages after birth. Again, that's not a science question, that's a religious values question. But here, I guess I want to caution everybody, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, wherever you find yourself, some questions have a hard time finding compromise. For those people who believe abortion is murder, they're going to respond as though it's murder. And no amount of information is going to change their mind, because it's not a fact-based question. It's a values question. It's a faith question. Jewish tradition, Jewish religious tradition, has a robust history of permitting abortion for a variety of reasons. And I think what we can contribute to the larger American debate is those pieces of Jewish spirituality and how we venerate life precisely by arguing in favor of reproductive freedom. But it's not going to be a matter of persuading someone who has a different religion, because this isn't a matter of providing information. There's no information that's going to change someone's mind here.
Thank you. Yeah. And there's a number of questions here about the role that God plays in this discussion. I can sort of leave it at that and let you go from there. I mean, or I can ask more specifically. I mean, one person mentioned process theology and how that accounts for morality and monastic faiths in the science community. There's many different questions here. If you want to sort of speak to the role God plays.
So one of the things that I love about Jewish tradition is we talk to God more than we talk about God. And many of the great Jewish thinkers of ages past have rightly asserted God isn't one of those facts to be compared and contrasted. Look, if something has to be public, replicable, and testable, God is none of those things. possibly public, but not replicable, and certainly not testable. You can't compare and contrast God to another God. So, um, so our relationship with God is really one of trust and experience, but not one of analysis. Personally, I do find process theology very helpful. In short, for those of you who don't follow such things, process theology is an understanding that everything in the universe is dynamic and changing and interconnected. So everything is in relationship with everything else, and everything is in a process of becoming. Um, and so that you don't have hard, solid things hitting into each other. And that means that, among other things, God also is becoming in relationship with the totality of everything else that is. And God gives us the capacity to intuit optimal next steps of growth, which God encourages but does not coerce. I find that understanding of God very Jewish and compatible with my own understanding of life. And obviously, that way of understanding God makes it easier to integrate science and religion, because if I don't believe in a coercive God who can suspend the laws of nature, I believe in a God who infuses nature with possibility and who opens up nature to a multiple kinds of future, an open-ended future. That's very compatible with the scientific model as well. If you believe in a God who's 100% in control of the outcome, and you think that everything that happens in the world happens for a reason, you're going to have a harder time, not only with process theology, but wait till what happens tomorrow happens.
Thank you. And looking, there's a question here. Does your background as an early atheist support your concurrent way of thinking that a religious childhood would not have led you?
Well, so that's another thing I can't compare and contrast. I have no idea what I would have turned out like if I had had a religious childhood. And also, I have no idea which kind of religious childhood you're thinking I would have had. Growing up in San Francisco, I could have been a Buddhist. I could have, I don't know. I mean, we were members of a Reformed congregation, but it wasn't a central part of our consciousness. Um, so I don't know. My wife grew up in an observant home. Her parents were Israeli, and she grew up in the San Fernando Valley. And, she has a kind of instinctive understanding of Judaism. She doesn't need to look it up in a book. And that is a great advantage. I, on the other hand, having had very little religion as a child, I have no bad Hebrew school memories to get rid of. I don't have an abusive rabbi. I don't have an oppressive memory of Yom Kippur. So I got to come to it as an adult and see how truly astonishing Judaism can be for adults. And that's a sort of advantage too. It also, by the way, helps me understand your average Jew better too, because to the extent that they're also exploring Judaism as adults, having a rabbi who doesn't assume that everyone grew up in it can be very helpful.
Yes, thank you. There's several questions here about animals and relating to some of your stories. This one person noted, given our origin story in the animal world and the close relationship most of us have with at least our companion animals, how can we best push back against cruelty, abuse, neglect, and exploitation? Should we consider animal personhood in their defense?
That is a really important question and a really complicated question. So I'm going to add questions we need to ask as we address it. What if we take seriously that people are not outside of nature, but we are part of nature? Everyone's going to nod, yes, 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 because that's what we're told to think. But let me tell you how you're not going to like that. That means that a strip mall is just as natural as a beaver's den, right? If a beehive is natural because bees made it and bees are natural, then a shopping mall or a freeway is natural because people made it. Nature is neither good nor bad, it just is. And if there's nothing outside of it, then it's just saying everything that is within nature, which I think is true. I think that helps us because that then helps eliminate the divide between people and non-human animals, right? We are a kind of animal, and the other animals are kinds of animals. And and we don't justify our existence in terms of them. And I think we can understand their existence not needing to be justified in terms of us. So um, we have an interest in a universe in which lots of life thrives, because it turns out that's a universe in which we can too. And and I think we do that by cultivating an appreciation of the diversity of life. But then here's the other thing. We need to be more concerned about human poverty, because one of the things that drives what some people consider cruelty to animals is how hard it is for people to get by. And it's a lot less expensive to eat animal products that are not humanely raised. So if we're really committed to improving animal rights, we need to also include the human animal in that equation. And we need to start generating the kind of structures that support people so that they have the luxury of taking the sensitivities and feelings of non-human animals into account.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer and hearing it from you. I had many debates when I was younger in theology school with people about humans being part of nature versus, humans thinking we're separate from nature, and how that can impact our relationship with the world and each other. So I appreciate that.
Yes, sure.
There's two questions here about creationism and evolution and whether or not they're incompatible, and also asking about if you have any thoughts on the cause of the Big Bang, or some of that realm.
So look, one can give an entire talk on evolution. I will say, first of all, that evolution is, I believe, fully compatible with Judaism. And many of the great rabbis of all denominations have confirmed that assessment. Anyone who's familiar with Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, knows that Jewish mysticism itself has a kind of evolutionary structure. So I think that for some Protestant fundamentalists, there's a challenge with evolution, but there should not be for Jews, regardless of their denomination or their opinions. So I do think creation and evolution are compatible, so long as what you mean by that is I believe that evolution is the mechanism by which God created the universe, and that the universe, both planetary and life forms, follow Darwinian patterns in which things evolve without direct purpose. Meaning, I don't believe in a God who 14 billion years ago said, I want to make sure that the life form with brain, with intelligence, comes out of the monkey family. I think that God launches a process that God then keeps encouraging, nurturing, empowering, and intelligence came out in one way, but that was fortuitous. Could have come out in other ways too. I don't think this is where if you rewound the movie, it would necessarily come out the same every time. So in that sense, I do believe that that what is evolutionary and purposeful is the world seems to be driven towards mindfulness and towards greater consciousness and greater experience. That, I think, cuts across all religions and all evolutionary theories. But the details, I think, are fortuitous. And in that regard, I tend to rely on Darwinian and neo-Darwinian theories to best explain how things worked out the way they worked out.
Thank you. And so, sort of as a potentially as a follow-up to that, what role do like spiritual experiences do the sort of play, or what thoughts do you have on sort of like on those experiences and in relation to science or you know?
Look, well, two things. If science is about what's public, replicable, testable, then by definition, spiritual experiences are going to lie outside the purview of science. And a sufficiently humble science will recognize that being outside of its purview doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means science isn't the tool to evaluate it. So I do believe that people have all the time deeply spiritual experiences for which there is not a scientific fact-based explanation. And I think we should be open to those and we should be grateful when we have them. And we should stop trying to cram it into a scientific straitjacket, which it's never going to fit. But the fact that it doesn't fit a scientific straitjacket doesn't mean it's not real. It just means you got to use the right tool. You know, so use a hammer for what hammers are designed for, use a wrench for what wrenches are designed for. Science is the realm of facts. Spiritual experiences are going to be outside of that realm.
Thank you. Yes, and I don't know, primarily this talk is about Judaism, but there's a question here. If you have thoughts or knowledge about other religious traditions and their relationship with science, if there's anything you want to speak toward.
Sure. I can say something very briefly. There isn't a religious tradition that can't be held in a way that makes it an ally and a partner to science. And there isn't a religious tradition that can't spill over in arrogance and false certitude in a way that makes it toxic. But it turns out that there are plenty of scientists whose attitude is triumphalist and toxic too, and plenty of scientists who have an appropriate sense of the limits of scientific method and are therefore allies to the humanities, including religion. So one can be a Taoist or a Wiccan or a Catholic or a Protestant or a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Confucian or whatever, and have a robust appreciation of science or not. So I think what we need to do in the Jewish community is, first of all, educate ourselves to be literate both in science and our own religion. That's a full-time project right there. And then we can do the work of reaching out to fellow travelers in other religious traditions who share those values, and we should swap stories with them, and we should learn about the ways that their faith helps them to navigate science and share with them the ways that ours does for us.
Yes, yes, thank you. A follow-up question on the subject of math. The math one just popped up, asking about, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not. It's probably beyond my knowledge, but quantum mechanics has always posed this most sharply. I guess referring back to what you were speaking to before, paths of projectiles are possibly part of our evolutionary imperatives, but quantum mechanics is totally out of line with these. I'm not sure if that's relevant to what you had said, but if not, we can move on from.
I don't have much to say on the subject. Quantum mechanics is fascinating, and I have a layperson's understanding of it. I can tell you that there's probably no area of science that is more abused than by what well-meaning religious people do with quantum physics. So be careful, guys.
Thank you. There's several questions here, just asking, and we can send everyone out there, we can send you, follow-up materials, but there's several people just asking if there's books that you can recommend. And there was one that you mentioned relating to super and natural that person would like you to repeat. And then we can definitely send it out in our follow-up materials.
I'm going to recommend two books. The first The first book is called God of Becoming and Relationships, The Dynamic Nature of Process Theology. It's written by yours truly. I think it's a really good book. And it's process theology from a Jewish perspective. And this is about science and religion. It's called Renewing the Process of Creation, a Jewish integration of science and spirit. If you order one copy of each book, you'll learn a lot. If you order multiple copies, my kids will eat this month. So I encourage you to support my children so they don't starve. Ian Barber is the author who wrote the General Introduction to the Philosophy of Science. It's a great book. I don't remember the exact title, but there's only one Ian Barber, so go on to whatever you get your books from, and you can find him there. Sally McTeague is the author of Supernatural, and she's a fascinating, also process theologian, philosopher of science, feminist, really great transformative thinker.
Great. Thank you. Yes. And we'll definitely send out, all the links to all of these in our follow-up materials. So hopefully your children will be able to eat this month. So
Awesome. And if you're interested, Matt, if you just send me an email, I can send you some articles of mine that are online that people can download as well. You can include that in the links if you'd like.
oh, great. Thank you. We'll definitely do that.
Great.
A question here, going back to creation, you talk about God creating the universe. Isn't science looking to see how the universe was created? Is that a conflict? Should you hold your thoughts in abeyance?
Well, here's the thing. I think thinking has to be provisional. So we always have opinions based on all the data we're aware of at the moment, with the awareness that we may learn conflicting data that will force us to revisit that opinion. That should be true in everything in your life. So here too, but here's where I think due humility kicks in. Science is based on the regularity of natural processes, so is logic. And the regularity of natural processes, what people call natural law, stops before the Big Bang. So there's a period of time called Planck time in which the laws of physics simply don't apply. That first instant after the explosion, the universe was too concentrated, too hot, too dense for any of the laws of physics to kick in. And the universe had to expand and cool for a period before those laws could begin to pertain, which means you will never have a piece of equipment that gets you back to Planck time or before. So you'll never watch the Big Bang. You can get really close, but you can't get to that moment. So that's to say, there will never be a scientific explanation for why the Big Bang happened. There will be plausible and possible explanations, but there'll be no way to decide among them which one is right. You might be able to rule some out as probably wrong, but you'll never be able to say this one is right. I have the evidence for it, because the evidence is now hidden behind that fog of quantum uncertainty that you'll never lift. In the same way that the question, are there multiple universes, will never receive a scientific answer. That is a whopper of an extravagant scientific claim. There are many reasons why that might be possible, but by definition, you can't step outside of a space-time bubble to compare and contrast it to others. So it may well be that there are other space-time bubbles, but we'll never know that as scientific data. So we just have to know that there's limits to what people can know factually. And whether you're okay with that or not, it's true.
Thank you. I think now is a good time. If you just have any final thoughts, I know you've said many wonderful things. If there's anything that you want to share anew or to repeat, any thoughts for us this evening? It's that you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I do want to bless you is what I want to do. I'm a rabbi, so I want to leave you with a blessing. You know, we live in a marvelous, marvelous cosmos. And we are among the most fortunate of all possible creatures. We live at the right time. We live at the middle time where our planet is big enough and established enough and old enough that it is gloriously complex, but young enough that it has a significant future ahead of us. And we're the middle size. We're big enough to be able to think thoughts and feel feelings and see things, but not so big that we can't move. And we live the middle length of time so that we can cultivate memories and form relations and connections. And we're aware of our history, and we are the inheritors of a glorious and complicated and murky past, and we are the forgers of an even more glorious future. So I want to bless all of you that you should take the gifts of curiosity and wonder and marvel and joy and relationship, and you should lean into them, live them, live them in terms of a faith that dances its way across the sea and a science that never stops asking why and how and wow. Because ultimately that's the frosting that makes life beautiful. And that is your heritage, both as Jews and as human beings.